fog clung to Blackwood Hollow like a second skin, curling through the evergreens and pooling in the dips of the earth. Elliot Harper pulled his weathered Subaru into a gravel turnout, the tires crunching over pine needles and loose stones. At 35, he wasn't old, but the past year had carved lines into his face that hadn't been there before. The divorce had gutted him, left him raw, and the endless churn of freelance photography gigs, weddings, corporate headshots, anything to pay the rent, hadn't helped. Blackwood Hollow, tucked deep in Washington's Olympic Peninsula, was his reset button. No clients, no Wi-Fi, just him, his camera, and the kind of quiet that could drown out the noise in his head. He stepped out, the air sharp with pine and damp earth. The trailhead sign was half swallowed by moss, its faded letters barely spelling out Blackwood Loop. Elliot slung his pack over one shoulder, his Nikon dangling from a strap across his chest. The plan was simple. Hike a couple of miles to a creek he'd read about on a hiking forum, set up camp and spend 3 days shooting the hollow's misty vistas. He'd always found solace in framing the world through a lens. It gave him control, something he'd lacked for months. The trail wound through dense spruce, the ground soft with decades of fallen needles. Fog muted the world, turning distant trees into ghostly shapes. Elliot's boots sank slightly with each step, the rhythm steadying his thoughts. He paused to snap a photo of a fern curling through the mist, its edges glowing faintly in the slanted afternoon light. "Perfect," he muttered, checking the frame. For the first time in weeks, he felt like himself. By late afternoon, he found the creek, a shallow ribbon of water chattering over smooth stones. The clearing nearby was just right, flat, sheltered by a cluster of cedars, with a small ring of rocks from some long-gone camper's fire. Elliot dropped his pack and got to work. Tent up, stakes driven deep into the loamy soil, food bag tied high in a tree, safe from bears. His portable stove hissed to life, warming a foil pouch of curry he'd packed. Routine was his anchor, each step a small rebellion against the chaos of the past year. As the sun dipped, painting the fog gold, Elliot wandered the clearing, camera in hand. He was framing a shot of the creek when a voice broke the silence. "You're a long way from anywhere, friend." Elliot turned, startled. An old man stood at the trail's edge, leaning on a gnarled walking stick. His wool cap was pulled low, and his jacket hung loose, like it belonged to a bigger man. "Didn't hear you coming," Elliot said, lowering his camera. "Folks don't out here." The man's eyes were sharp, too bright for his weathered face. "Name's Kessler. Live a few miles off. You camping alone?" "Yeah, just me." Elliot forced a smile. Needed some quiet. Kessler nodded, but his gaze drifted to the trees. "Quiet's what you get in the hollow. Too much sometimes. Watch for the eyes in the trees. They see you before you see them." His tone was flat, like he was stating the weather. Elliot's smile faltered. "Eyes? Like animals?" Kessler didn't answer, just tipped his head and shuffled back into the fog. Elliot stood there, the creek's chatter suddenly too loud. "Old guy's probably half cocked," he muttered, but his eyes scanned the tree line. Nothing but mist and shadows. He shook it off and returned to camp, building a small fire as the light faded. The flames crackled, sending sparks into the thickening dusk. He sipped coffee from a tin mug, the warmth grounding him, and tried to focus on the moment. This was what he came for. Solitude, simplicity. Then voices, not loud but close, cutting through the fog like a blade. Two figures emerged, their silhouettes sharpening as they stepped into the firelight. A woman late 20s with a bright smile and a braid poking out from a knit cap. A man, maybe her brother, lean and quiet, his eyes catching the fire's glow. "Mind if we join you?" the woman asked, her voice warm but too familiar, like they'd met before. "I'm Maya. This is Caleb. We're camped just over the ridge." Elliot hesitated, then gestured to the ground. "Fire's free. I'm Elliot." They sat, Maya cross-legged, Caleb perched on a log, his hands stuffed in his jacket. They talked trails, where they'd hiked, how long they'd been out. Maya was chatty, asking about Elliot's camera, his plans. Caleb said little, his stare lingering on Elliot's gear. It wasn't threatening exactly, but it felt like he was cataloging everything. "Solo camping's bold," Maya said, her smile teasing. "Don't get lonely out here." "Used to it," Elliot replied, sipping his coffee. "You two siblings?" "Yep," Caleb said, his first word in minutes. His voice was low, almost swallowed by the fire's crackle. They shared a thermos of tea, offering Elliot a sip. He declined, citing a made-up allergy. The conversation petered out, and Maya stood abruptly. "We should head back. Early start tomorrow." As they left, Elliot noticed his camera lens. The 50mm he'd used earlier wasn't in his bag. He checked the ground, the rocks, even his tent. Gone. "You didn't see a lens, did you?" he called after them. Maya turned, her smile unchanged. "Nope. Maybe it rolled off?" Caleb didn't look back, just kept walking into the fog. Their footsteps faded, but the air felt heavier, like the hollow was holding its breath. Elliot doused the fire, the hiss loud in the sudden quiet. He crawled into his tent, zipping it tight, and lay still, listening. The creek babbled, the wind sighed, but then whispers. Soft, rhythmic, just beyond the tent's thin walls. Not words, not yet, but deliberate, like a conversation meant to be overheard. His heart kicked hard against his ribs. He gripped his phone, its screen dark with no signal, and stared at the tent flap, waiting for the whispers to grow closer. Or stop. The whispers lingered in Elliot Harper's mind like a bad dream, faint but persistent. As he unzipped his tent at dawn, the fog in Blackwood Hollow hadn't lifted, blanketing the creek and the cedars in a gray haze that made everything feel closer, smaller. He crawled out, boots sinking into the damp earth, and scanned the clearing. His campsite looked untouched, the fire pit a mound of cold ash, his food bag still dangling high in the tree, his pack leaning against a rock. But the absence of his camera lens gnawed at him. It wasn't just expensive. It was his favorite, the one that caught light like nothing else. He'd checked every inch of the clearing last night, and the only people nearby had been Maya and Caleb. Elliot brewed coffee on his stove, the hiss of the flame grounding him. The siblings' camp was just over the ridge, they'd said. He squinted through the fog, but no tents, no movement, just trees and silence. "Probably packed up early," he muttered, though the thought didn't sit right. Their friendliness had felt rehearsed, and Caleb's stare had lingered too long on his gear. Kessler's warning about eyes in the trees didn't help either. Elliot shook his head, trying to dislodge the unease. He was here to shoot photos, to clear his head, not to chase ghost stories. He packed light for the day, slinging his camera, minus the missing lens, over his shoulder and stuffing a water bottle and granola bars into his day pack. The hiking forum had mentioned an abandoned logging camp deeper in the hollow, a relic from the 1920s, half reclaimed by the forest, perfect for moody shots, the kind that might sell to a travel magazine. He locked his car, double-checked his tent stakes, and headed out, the trail swallowing him in minutes. The fog thickened as he climbed, muffling the crunch of his boots. Every few steps he glanced back, half expecting to see Caleb's lean frame or Maya's bright smile materializing behind him. The trail narrowed, weaving through ferns and fallen logs slick with moss. Then he saw it, a tree trunk etched with strange carvings, spirals, jagged lines, and what looked like eyes, crude but deliberate, scratched deep into the bark. Elliot froze, his breath catching. He raised his camera, snapping a few shots despite the dim light. The carvings weren't fresh, but they weren't old either. No moss grew in the grooves. He moved to the next tree. More spirals, more eyes. A whole cluster of them, like silent watchers lining the path. Kessler's words echoed. They see you before you see them. Kids probably, Elliot said aloud, his voice thin in the fog. But his pulse quickened. He kept hiking, the carvings appearing every few trees now, guiding him deeper into the hollow. The air grew colder, the creek's chatter fading behind him. After an hour, he reached the logging camp, or what was left of it. Rusted saw blades leaned against a crumbling shed. Its roof caved in under a tangle of vines. A stack of rotting logs lay scattered, half buried in the earth. Elliot framed a shot of the shed, the fog curling around its edges like smoke. This is why I'm here, he thought, forcing his focus, not for creepy locals or missing lenses. He was adjusting his aperture when footsteps crunched behind him. Elliot spun, heart lurching. Maya and Caleb stood at the clearing's edge, packs slung low, their faces half hidden in the mist. Fancy meeting you here, Maya called, her smile as bright as last night, but sharper, like it was meant to cut through his guard. Caleb said nothing, his eyes locked on Elliot's camera. Thought you two were breaking camp early, Elliot said, keeping his tone light but his grip tight on the camera strap. Got turned around, Maya said, stepping closer. This place is a maze in the fog. You know it? Not really. Elliot shifted his weight, eyeing the trail behind them. Just chasing some photos. Caleb finally spoke, his voice low and clipped. Find anything good? He tilted his head toward the shed, but his hand rested in his jacket pocket. Fingers curled around something small and round. Elliot's stomach twisted. It looked like the shape of his missing lens. Some old junk, Elliot said, forcing a shrug. You see my lens back at camp? I'm still looking. Maya's smile didn't falter. Nope. Maybe it's in the creek? Things slip away out here. Caleb's hand stayed in his pocket, his stare unwavering. Elliot's guts screamed to leave, but he didn't want to turn his back. I can help you find the main trail, he offered, hoping to steer them away from the camp. And his gear. Maya nodded, but Caleb hesitated, his fingers tightening around whatever was in his pocket. They followed Elliot back down the trail, their footsteps too close, too steady. He kept his pace brisk, pointing out landmarks, a twisted cedar, a boulder split by roots to fill the silence. Maya chatted about their supposed cross-country trip, but her stories were vague, timelines shifting. Caleb stayed silent, his presence like a shadow at Elliot's shoulder. Back at the creek, Elliot's campsite came into view, still intact. He turned to the siblings. Trailhead's that way, he said, pointing. About a mile. Thanks, man, Maya said, but neither moved. Caleb's hand emerged from his pocket, empty now, and Elliot's eyes darted to the ground, half expecting to see his lens glinting in the dirt. Nothing. See you around, Caleb said, his voice flat. They turned, disappearing into the fog, their footsteps fading faster than they should have. Elliot stood frozen, listening until the hollow was quiet again. He checked his tent, his pack, his food bag. Everything was there, but the air felt wrong, like the forest was holding something back. That night, he built a fire bigger than necessary, the flames licking high to push back the fog. He ate quickly, barely tasting the noodles, and kept his camera close, using a backup lens that didn't feel right. The carvings haunted him. Those eyes, those spirals. Were they markers? Warnings? He tried to laugh it off, but Kessler's words clung like damp clothes. As the fire died to embers, he crawled into his tent, zipping it tight. Sleep wouldn't come. The creek's babble was too loud, the fog too thick. Then movement. A soft crunch, just beyond the firelight. Elliot's breath caught. He clicked on his headlamp, the beam slicing through the tent's thin walls. Nothing. He eased the zipper open, just a fraction, and peered out. A shadow stood at the edge of the clearing, holding something small that caught the moonlight. A glint, sharp and familiar. His lens. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, the glint steady like a signal. Elliot's heart hammered. He wanted to shout, to demand answers, but his voice wouldn't come. Then the shadow stepped back, swallowed by the fog. The glint vanished. Elliot's beam swept the clearing, finding nothing but trees and mist. He zipped the tent shut, hands shaking, and checked his watch. 2:17 a.m. He wouldn't sleep tonight. Not with that glint burned into his mind. And when he crept out at dawn, heart still racing, he found the siblings' camp over the ridge. Empty. No tents, no packs, just flattened grass where they'd been. Elliot Harper didn't wait for the fog to lift. The empty campsite over the ridge, nothing but flattened grass where Maya and Caleb's tents should have been, pushed him past unease into action. His hands shook as he stuffed his sleeping bag into its sack, not bothering to roll it neatly. The glint of his camera lens in the shadow's hand last night replayed in his mind, sharp and cold, like a warning he couldn't unsee. Blackwood Hollow no longer felt like a refuge. The cedars loomed too close, the creek's chatter too loud, and those carved eyes on the trees seemed to follow him as he broke camp. He needed to get out now. But his car keys were gone. He tore through his pack, checked every pocket, even crawled inside the tent to pat down the ground. Nothing. The realization hit like a punch. Someone had been here, closer than the shadow last night. Elliot's breath caught, his eyes darting to the tree line. The fog was thinner today, but it still clung to the hollow, blurring the edges of the world. He slung his pack over his shoulder, camera strapped tight to his chest, and started toward the trailhead on foot. The ranger station was a few miles away, and Ranger Lila Torres would know what to do. She had to. The trail felt narrower than yesterday. The carved spirals and eyes appearing on nearly every tree now, their jagged lines deeper, more deliberate. Elliot's boots crunched over needles, each step louder than he wanted. He kept glancing back, half expecting Maya's bright smile or Caleb's cold stare to emerge from the mist. The logging camp came into view again, its rusted saw blades glinting faintly under the weak morning light. He almost kept walking, but something pulled him back. A need to understand, to find proof he wasn't imagining things. He stepped into the clearing,